My kidney donation to my son was about to happen when my grandson spoke out. The ceiling above me was a hard white sky with no clouds, just the glare of a surgical lamp that made my eyes water. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold metal, a smell so clean it felt cruel. I lay flat on the operating table, my arms out, my fingers trembling even though the blankets were tucked tight. The monitor beside me kept time with a steady, indifferent beep that sounded too calm for what was happening to my life. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. A nurse's voice floated near my ear, gentle the way people speak to someone they don't want to scare. Another nurse adjusted a strap across my thigh, tightening it as if I might rise and run. I tried to swallow and my throat scraped dry. Somewhere beyond the blue curtain, steel instruments clicked together with a neat, practiced sound, like someone setting a dinner table for a meal I wouldn't eat. Through a glass panel at the side of the room, I could see them, my son's wife, her parents, and a few hospital staff moving in a quiet blur. The glass made them look far away, like figures in a television show. But her eyes were sharp enough to cross the distance. Even from there, she watched me as if she were counting down my choices. I'd already signed the forms. The papers felt heavier than the blanket now, heavier than the years I'd spent scraping and saving and praying. I signed because my mother signed. That's what I told myself. A mother doesn't negotiate with her child's pain. A mother doesn't ask for comfort when her son is fighting to breathe. And yet my chest felt tight, not only with fear of surgery, but with a strange sense that I was being pushed. Not asked, not gently guided, but shoved toward something like a cliff edge. "Mrs. Hart," the surgeon said, and his voice pulled me back from spiraling thoughts. He was tall, clean-eyed, and calm in the way surgeons are calm. Calm because they've trained their hands not to shake. "We'll begin anesthesia soon. Do you have any questions?" Questions. The word landed like an insult. I had questions, yes. So many. Why did my daughter-in-law speak of my kidney like it belonged to the family? Why did her parents sit in my living room with their polite fruit basket and their harsh mouths? Why did I feel watched, managed, handled like paperwork? But my son, my boy, was in the next room. He was the reason I had walked into this hospital. He was the reason I had let them shave my skin and dress me in a thin blue gown that didn't feel like mine. He was the reason I had tried to ignore the faint alarms ringing in my heart. "I'm ready," I whispered, because that was easier than confessing I wasn't. A nurse lifted a syringe. The needle glinted under the light, bright and merciless. I turned my face slightly, trying to focus on something softer, anything. My mind reached for old pictures, like it always did when I was frightened. A small kitchen. Flour dust on my hands. A boy with scraped knees sitting at my table while I cleaned his wounds. His eyes bright, his laugh loud, his mouth always full of dreams. I had raised him alone in many ways, even when his father was still walking and speaking. Life had never been gentle with me. It taught me early that you don't wait for rescue. You become it. My husband's illness came later, arriving like a slow storm that never left. At first it was a cane, then a walker, then a wheelchair, then silence. His body remained in the house like a shadow that took up space but offered no warmth. I fed him, washed him, turned him, and spoke to him anyway, as if my voice could keep him tethered to the world. He answered with blinks and sighs and the faintest squeezes when the pain was strong. My sons grew in that house under the weight of my work. I sold what I could. I repaired what I couldn't replace. I mended clothes and patched walls and saved money in jars tucked behind the flour. There was no room in my life for anything delicate. Love was practical. Love was lunch packed in a paper bag. Love was staying up late to count dollars by dim light. My older son married a woman who came smiling at first. She spoke sweetly, brought medicine, reminded him to drink water, acted like the kind of wife people praise in front of neighbors. "You're lucky," they told me. "She takes such good care of him." I wanted to believe them. I truly did. But sometimes, when she thought no one watched, her face turned hard in a way that did not match her voice. Once I walked into the hall at night and heard her whispering into her phone, quick and low. When she noticed me, she ended the call too fast, then smiled like a mask being pulled tight. "Just a friend," she said. "A friend." At midnight. With her eyes like that. The first time she spoke to me about donating my kidney, she didn't ask. She informed. "The doctors say you're the match," she told me in my own kitchen, standing with her arms crossed as if she'd come to inspect my obedience. "There's no time. You have to do your duty." Duty. The word tasted bitter. Like my life had been reduced to a single function. Supply what they needed, then step aside. Her parents arrived soon after, stepping into my home with the confidence of people who never had to count coins. They sat at my table, their backs straight, their voices firm. They spoke about honor and family and sacrifice, as if they were reading from a script. If I refused, they warned, people would talk. People would judge. People would say I wasn't a real mother. I didn't say what I wanted to say, that a real mother isn't a piece of spare machinery waiting in storage. I didn't say that my body had already carried more than its share. I didn't say that love should never be forced at knife point. I nodded and swallowed it all, because that is what I had done my whole life. Swallowed. Endured. Kept going. Only my younger son looked at the situation with eyes that didn't accept the story. He was quieter, always had been. He worked with his hands, fixing pipes and wires and broken things, like he was trying to repair the world piece by piece. When he visited, he didn't talk much, but his gaze moved carefully over the house, over my face, over the way my daughter-in-law spoke. He asked questions that made me uncomfortable because they touched nerves I didn't want to admit were there. Then my grandson, 9 years old, all elbows and fast feet, started saying things that sounded too heavy for a child. "What if someone gets sick because another person wants them to?" he asked me once, rolling a toy car back and forth on my floor as if he needed something small to hold on to. I laughed nervously and patted his hair, telling him not to imagine things. But later, alone in the kitchen, I kept hearing his words like a small bell that wouldn't stop ringing. A week later, I went to the hospital to bring my son soup. I watched his wife at his bedside. She turned when she heard me enter, smiling too quickly. Her hand hovered over a cup of water, and for a split second I saw something, a small pill, bright-colored, drop into the cup. The motion was fast, practiced. "What's that?" I asked. "A supplement," she said, smiling wider. "The doctor recommended it." When she stepped out, I found the nurse station and asked the doctor on call, trying to sound casual. Had they added a supplement? Was there something new? He checked the file and shook his head. "No new medication," he said. The hospital hallway felt suddenly too long, too white, too loud. My heart thudded in my ears. I walked back to the room and looked at my son's face. Thin, tired, trusting. He was still my child. Still my boy. And someone, somewhere, was lying. That evening my grandson came to my house with an old phone clutched in his hands. The screen was cracked. The case was worn. He sat at my table without playing, without asking for snacks, without doing any of the things he usually did. "Grandma," he said quietly, eyes fixed on mine. "I found something. I think you need to hear it." He pressed play. A woman's voice whispered through the tiny speaker. Familiar. Smooth. Cold beneath the softness. "After the transplant, the results will look perfect. Don't worry. She won't dare refuse." My stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling downstairs. I stared at the phone as if it were alive. I stared at my grandson's face, pale with fear, and I realized he had been carrying this alone. I wanted to tell him to stop. I wanted to tell him this couldn't be real. I wanted the world to return to the simple shape I understood. Mother, son, wife, family, love. But the words didn't come. Only a shaking breath. I pulled him into my arms and held him hard, as if my grip could protect him from what he'd already heard. His shoulders trembled against me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing," I told him, though my own voice sounded far away. You did the brave thing. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with the light low, listening to the slow tick of the clock and the soft wheeze of my husband in the other room. I replayed the recording again and again until my hands cramped around the phone. After the transplant. Results. Perfect. Refuse. It didn't sound like the language of medicine. It sounded like the language of a plan. By morning, the hospital called to confirm my surgery time. The nurse on the line was cheerful, as if she were discussing a routine appointment. I answered politely, because that was what I had been trained to do by a lifetime of swallowing fear. When I hung up, my younger son came by with his toolbox. He didn't even set it down before he spoke. "Mom," he said, voice tight. "I saw something." He showed me a blurry photo on his phone. My daughter-in-law stood in a parking lot beside her car, handing a small bag to a man in a cap. The man handed her an envelope. Their bodies were angled away from cameras, away from people, away from witnesses. My hands went cold around the phone. "I followed her," my son admitted. "I didn't want to, but she's been acting wrong. I'm scared for my brother. And I'm scared for you." I wanted to shout at him for spying. I wanted to tell him to stop making trouble. I wanted to deny it all so I could keep moving forward without breaking. Instead I sat down, because my knees couldn't hold me. In the afternoon, my daughter-in-law arrived at my house with her parents again, like a storm returning to finish its work. They spoke of time running out. They spoke of what a good mother does. They spoke as if my body was a resource they had already budgeted for. I listened. I nodded. I smiled when I needed to. And inside, I made a decision that felt like stepping into fire. If I refused openly, they would push harder. If I accused them without proof the hospital would recognize, they would call me hysterical. If I panicked, they would tighten their grip. So I agreed to proceed. I let them think they had won. I went to the hospital on the scheduled day with my signature on the papers and my heart full of ice. I told myself I was buying time. I told myself I was walking into the lion's den so I could see the lion's teeth. In the preparation hallway, the floors shone too brightly. Nurses walked past like moving parts in a machine. My daughter-in-law stayed close, her hand lightly on my elbow as if she were guiding an elderly relative, but the touch felt like a leash. "After this," she murmured, "everything will be fine." Through a window, I caught a glimpse of her and her mother speaking to a man in a cap. My skin prickled. The same kind of envelope. The same quick movements. The same sense that I was watching a transaction, not a family. Then they brought me into the operating room. Now I lay on the cold steel, under the harsh light, with a syringe hovering like a punctuation mark at the end of my sentence. I was trying to steady my breathing, trying to be brave, trying to keep my face blank. And then the door exploded open. A child's voice cut through the room like a siren. "Grandma." The monitors kept beeping, but everything else stopped. I turned my eyes as far as the straps allowed. My grandson stood in the doorway, muddy shoes, rumpled clothes, chest heaving, a cracked phone in his fist like a weapon made of truth. "I'm telling everyone," he shouted, voice shaking but loud, "why my dad really needs your kidney." The surgeon's hand froze mid-motion. A metal instrument clattered to the floor. The room went still in the way rooms go still right before lightning strikes. On the other side of the glass, my daughter-in-law's face was drained of color. And I realized, with a wave of fear so sharp it almost felt like relief, that the moment I had tried to avoid was here. The truth was about to step into the light. The boy's voice hung in the air like a glass that had just shattered, and for a heartbeat no one moved. Not the surgeon with his gloved hands held above my stomach, not the nurse with a syringe hovering at my arm, not even me, strapped down and staring as if blinking might make the moment disappear. The only thing that dared to continue was the heart monitor, stubbornly keeping its rhythm, as if my body refused to accept that my life had just split into before and after. My grandson stood in the doorway with his chest rising and falling too fast, the way children breathe when they've run too far on pure panic. His shoes were muddy, his hair flattened on one side, and his small fingers clamped around an old phone so tightly the plastic looked ready to crack. Behind him, a nurse who had clearly lost the battle of stopping him hovered with helpless hands, whispering, "Sweetie, you can't be here," but her voice sounded thin, like it belonged in another room. The surgeon's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the sharp focus of someone trained to look for the truth under noise. He lifted one palm, a quiet command that carried more force than shouting. "No anesthesia," he said. "No incision. Everyone pause." The syringe was pulled back as if it had suddenly become dangerous. The nurse's hand trembled for a second before she set it down on the tray. A second doctor took one step toward my grandson, then stopped when the surgeon shook his head. "Let him speak," the surgeon said again, more firmly. "Now." On the other side of the glass, my daughter-in-law slammed her palm against the panel so hard the sound made my skin jump. Her face was pinched, the softness she usually wore like makeup stripped away. Her mouth opened, and the word that came out was not concern for me, not fear for her husband's health, but pure command. "Stop," she shrieked. "Don't listen to him. He's a child, he doesn't know what he's saying." Her parents crowded behind her, their bodies angled like a shield, as if they could block what was coming with posture alone. Her mother's eyes darted around the room like she was counting exits. Her father pressed his lips together and leaned toward the glass, speaking low, trying to look calm, trying to look respectable. The surgeon didn't even glance at them. His attention stayed on my grandson. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mario," my grandson said, and his voice shook on the syllables, but he didn't drop his gaze. He stepped closer to me, the phone held out in both hands the way a child offers something fragile. "Grandma," he said, and his eyes flicked to my face, and suddenly I saw it. The fear under the bravery, the way his courage was something he'd built with shaking hands. "I have to show them. I have to." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My throat was full of sand. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to carry this. I wanted to tell him to run back out and let the adults fight. But I was the adult, and I had been the one lying here, silent, letting other people decide what my body was worth. The surgeon leaned in slightly. "Show me," he said. Mario's thumb hovered over the cracked screen for half a second, as if he was afraid the phone might betray him. Then he pressed play. The tiny speaker spilled a whisper into the bright room. A woman's voice, smooth and familiar, speaking with the confidence of someone who believed she couldn't be caught. "After the transplant, the results will look perfect," the voice said. "Don't worry. She won't dare refuse." The sentence didn't sound like a conversation about saving a life. It sounded like a plan being checked off a list. The room stayed silent, but it wasn't empty silence. It was the thick silence of people realizing something is wrong in a way they can't pretend away. One nurse's eyes widened. Another nurse turned her head toward the surgeon, waiting for direction like a soldier on a battlefield. The surgeon's jaw tightened. "Stop everything," he said, and this time his voice was a blade. "Stop now." A doctor reached toward the curtain as if to draw it farther, to protect me from the chaos, but the surgeon shook his head again. He moved closer to me and spoke in a quieter voice meant only for me. "Ma'am," he said, "did you know about this?" Tears slid sideways into my hairline. I stared at the ceiling light and tried to speak like a normal person, but my whole body felt like it was filled with stones. I managed a whisper. "I suspected," I said. "I didn't know how to prove it." His gaze softened by a fraction. "You did the right thing by stopping," he said, and it made something inside me crack, because I hadn't stopped. My grandson had. On the other side of the glass, Rebecca's face twisted. She pounded again, harder, as if violence could erase sound. "That's fake," she screamed. "He made it up. He's been coached. He's trying to ruin us." Her mother joined in, words spilling sharp and fast, the same kind of pressure they used on me at my dining table. "You can't believe a child. A child doesn't understand. This is a sick woman's jealousy. She's poisoning the family against her own daughter-in-law." My grandson flinched, but he didn't fold. He lifted his chin, and his voice, though thin, rose in stubborn defiance. "I didn't make it up," he said. "I found it on my mom's old phone. I heard it. I saw it." The surgeon held up his hand again. "We will determine what is real," he said. "Not you." He nodded to a nurse. "Security. Now." A nurse hurried out, her shoes squeaking on the floor. The sound was too ordinary for what was happening, like hearing a grocery cart roll past a funeral. Mario's eyes darted toward the glass. "There's more," he said quickly, as if he was afraid time would run out. "There's a video. It's when my mom and my grandma, her mom, were talking in the parking lot." He tapped the screen again. The phone lagged, and for one terrifying second it looked like it wouldn't work. Then an image flickered into life, grainy and tilted. A parking lot. Gray sky. The side of a car. Two women standing close together, their faces turned toward each other. The audio was clearer than the picture, and the words came through sharp enough to sting. "If the transplant works," an older woman's voice said, "we'll have enough proof to sell it bigger. Abroad. The money will change everything." My stomach lurched. The room seemed to tilt under the surgical light. The words didn't fully make sense. Proof of what, sell what, but they carried the unmistakable weight of greed. A transplant wasn't being discussed like a desperate medical act. It was being discussed like a business opportunity. The surgeon's eyes flicked from the phone to me and back again. His face went pale, the way a person's face goes pale when they realize they have been standing too close to something dirty. "Stop recording," he said to no one in particular, meaning stop the chain of events, stop the harm, stop the lie. Then, louder, "This is no longer a surgical situation. This is an ethical and legal emergency." Another doctor stepped forward, voice uncertain. "Dr. Evans, we still have a patient next door in end-stage failure." "I am aware," the surgeon snapped, and the force in his tone made the room obey him like gravity. "We will not cut a healthy donor open while there is evidence of coercion and possible criminal activity connected to the recipient's condition." Mario's eyes filled with tears. He wiped them fast, angry at them for coming. "I didn't want Grandma to get hurt," he said, and the simple sentence broke me more than any shouting ever had. I tried to lift my hand toward him. The strap gave no mercy. I made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "Mario," I whispered. He stepped closer until he was beside the table, and he pressed his small hand against my wrist where the skin was exposed. His palm was warm. It felt like the only real thing in the room. In the hallway outside, feet pounded. A moment later, security appeared. Two men in dark uniforms, faces serious, eyes scanning the room like they were searching for a threat. One of them spoke quietly to the surgeon. The surgeon pointed toward the glass. The guards moved, and I saw them reach for the door controls. Rebecca's face changed when she realized she wasn't in charge anymore. The panic in her eyes sharpened into something uglier. "No," she mouthed through the glass, her lips forming the word without sound. The door opened. Cold hallway air spilled in. The guards stepped toward her and her parents. Rebecca's mother immediately started protesting, her hands fluttering like frantic birds. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted. "We're a respectable family." Rebecca's father raised his palms in a calming gesture, the way a man tries to calm a situation when he believes calm will keep him out of trouble. "Doctor," he said, his voice smooth, "let's not overreact. We can handle this privately." "There's no need to." The surgeon cut him off without looking. "Nothing private happens here," he said. "Not when a donor is strapped to a table and a child brings evidence of coercion." Rebecca tried to push past the guards, toward the operating room, toward me, toward Mario, toward the phone, toward whatever she believed she could still control. One guard blocked her path with his body. Her hands balled into fists. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You can't stop the surgery. My husband will die." The words might have hit harder if I hadn't spent months hearing how my refusal would kill him. If her grief had sounded like love instead of leverage. If her eyes had softened at the thought of him suffering. But her gaze wasn't on her husband. It wasn't even on me. It was locked on that phone like the phone was a snake biting her ankle. In the doorway, another figure appeared. My younger son, Brandon, breathless, hair damp with sweat. He looked as if he'd run the whole way from wherever he'd been, propelled by instinct and fear. His eyes swept the room, landing on me first, then on Mario, then snapping to Rebecca with a fury so raw it made his shoulders shake. "What's going on?" he demanded. Mario turned toward him, sobbing now, and held up the phone. "I showed them," he choked out. "I showed them." Brandon's gaze softened for a heartbeat at the sight of his nephew. Then it hardened again, and he stepped forward, but the surgeon raised a hand. "Not here," the surgeon warned. "No fighting. No touching. This is a controlled environment." Brandon stopped himself, jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped. He looked at Rebecca as if she was something he'd discovered in the walls of the house. "Mold, rot, poison. You did this," he said, his voice low and shaking. "You made him sick. You pushed Mom onto that table." Rebecca's eyes flashed. "You're insane," she snapped. "You've always hated me. You've always wanted to split this family." "I wanted to protect my brother," Brandon shot back, and his voice cracked on the words. "And I wanted to protect my mother from being treated like spare parts." The surgeon turned to another nurse. "Notify hospital administration," he ordered. "And contact law enforcement. Immediately. Preserve all recordings. Secure the patient's medication records. Freeze access to this chart until compliance is present." The nurse nodded, already moving, already speaking into a phone with a brisk professionalism that didn't match the chaos in my heart. I lay there staring at the ceiling light, tears slipping out without permission. My son Adam was still next door, still sick, still unaware that the world around him was collapsing. The guilt surged in my chest like a wave. Even now, even after everything, my mind reached for one desperate thought. What if stopping the surgery harms him? The surgeon leaned close again as if he could read the panic in my face. "We will treat your son," he said, firm and clear. "But not like this. Not at the cost of exploiting you." A nurse began loosening the straps. The sensation of freedom was strange, almost painful, like waking up after being pinned under something heavy. My arms tingled as blood returned. I flexed my fingers, and they shook like leaves. Mario clung to the edge of the table, crying silently now, the kind of crying children do when they've run out of energy to make noise. I reached for him the moment my wrist was free and pulled him into my chest. He smelled like school, dusty fabric and soap and the faint trace of outdoor air. "You did it," I whispered into his hair. "You saved me." "I was scared," he confessed, muffled against my gown. "I know," I said. "Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you did it anyway." Behind us, the guards escorted Rebecca and her parents out of the immediate area. Rebecca's mother kept talking, trying to weave words into a net that would catch them and pull them back to safety. Rebecca's father kept insisting it could be handled, that there was no need to embarrass anyone. Rebecca herself didn't plead. She glared, at the surgeon, at Brandon, at the nurses, at me. Her eyes were dry, her face tight, her rage controlled in a way that made it more frightening. She looked like someone who didn't regret what she'd done, only that she'd been interrupted. As they moved her toward the hallway, Rebecca twisted her head and finally looked straight at me. For a second, just 1 second, her expression slipped and I saw something behind it. Cold calculation, like a cashier counting money, like someone measuring a person's worth in parts. Then the mask snapped back into place and she shouted, loud enough to turn heads down the corridor. "You're ruining his chance to live," she screamed. "If he dies, it's on you." The old instinct rose inside me, the instinct to accept blame just to keep the peace. The instinct to apologize even when I'd been harmed. I felt it pull at my chest the way gravity pulls at water. But my grandson was in my arms. My younger son was standing like a shield. And the surgeon, a man who had no reason to care about my family drama, was treating me like a human being, not an obligation. I didn't answer Rebecca. I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg her to calm down. For the first time in months, I let her words float past me without catching them. When they wheeled me out of the operating room, the hallway lights seemed less harsh than before. The air felt different. Not warmer, but clearer, like a window had been opened in a room full of smoke. Nurses moved around us with purposeful speed, but their faces held a new seriousness, the kind that comes when a workplace becomes a place where truth has landed. As they rolled me toward a recovery bay, I heard Adam's weak voice from a nearby room, confused and frightened. "Mom," he called. "What's happening? Why did they stop?" The sound sliced through me. I turned my head toward the door, toward my son who was still trapped in the illness and the lie. My arms tightened around Mario reflexively, as if holding him closer could hold the world together. Brandon stepped beside the gurney, his hand gripping the rail. "I'm going to him," he said to me, voice raw. "I'm going to tell him the truth." I nodded, though my heart felt like it was tearing. "Be gentle," I whispered. He's still my boy." Brandon's eyes flicked to my face, and for a moment the anger softened into grief. "So are you," he said. "And you deserve gentleness too." As the gurney rolled forward, I watched Brandon peel away down the corridor toward Adam's door, his shoulders squared like a man walking into a storm. I watched the surgeon stride in the opposite direction, already speaking to staff and making calls that would change the course of what happened next. I watched Mario's small hand clutch my gown, as if he was afraid the world might snatch me away again. And in the center of it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace. Not yet. But a thin, stubborn strand of control returning to my body, to my voice, to my life. Because the surgery hadn't happened. Because the truth had arrived in muddy shoes and a cracked phone. Because my grandson had shouted, "Grandma," and reminded everyone in that bright room that I wasn't a duty. I was a person. The corridor outside the operating wing felt longer than it ever had before, as if the hospital itself had stretched to make room for everything that was about to happen. The gurney wheels squeaked softly beneath me as a nurse pushed me into a recovery bay, but my mind stayed fixed on the sound of Adam's voice echoing from the nearby room. Confusion. Fear. The kind of fear that comes when something you trusted suddenly stops making sense. They settled me onto a narrow bed and drew the curtain halfway, not to isolate me, but to give me a moment to breathe. My body shook now that the danger had passed, the delayed tremor of someone who had stood too close to the edge. Mario sat on the chair beside me, his legs dangling, his shoulders slumped like all the strength had drained out of him at once. He stared at his shoes, rubbing the toe of one sneaker against the other, a child suddenly unsure if bravery would bring punishment. I reached for his hand, and he looked up quickly, eyes red and glossy. "Are you mad at me?" he asked in a voice barely louder than a breath. The question broke my heart more cleanly than any accusation ever could. "Mad?" I said softly. "No, my love. I'm proud of you. I don't know if I've ever been prouder of anyone in my life." His lips trembled. I thought everyone would hate me. Mom always says I shouldn't talk about family things. I pulled him closer, pressing my forehead against his hair. "Some things," I said carefully, "are too important to stay quiet about. Especially when someone is getting hurt." Outside the curtain, voices rose and fell. Doctors, nurses, administrators. The sound carried urgency now, clipped and professional, the language of procedures and protocols. I heard words like ethics committee, law enforcement, evidence chain, and patient protection. Each term felt heavy, like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples outward. A few minutes later, the curtain shifted and the surgeon stepped in. He looked tired already, as if the weight of what he'd uncovered had settled into his bones. "Mrs. Hart," he said, pulling the curtain wider so I wouldn't feel hidden. "I want to explain what's happening next." I nodded, bracing myself. We've halted the transplant completely, he said. Your son will not receive a kidney today. Instead, he's being stabilized and evaluated for dialysis and alternative treatments. We're also running comprehensive toxicology tests. Given what has come to light, we need to determine whether his condition was worsened or caused by substances outside approved treatment. The words hit me one by one, slow and sharp. Worsened. Caused. Substances. So, he might not have needed this? I asked. The surgeon didn't rush his answer. It's too early to say, he replied carefully. But there are indicators that suggest his decline may not have been entirely natural. I closed my eyes. A wave of guilt crashed through me, not guilt for stopping the surgery, but guilt for not stopping everything sooner. For doubting my own instincts. For letting myself be cornered by voices louder than my own. And them? I asked quietly. My daughter-in-law and her parents. They are being detained by hospital security while police are en route, he said. Given the recordings and images, there is sufficient cause to open a criminal investigation. The hospital is fully cooperating. Mario stiffened beside me at the word police. I squeezed his hand reassuringly. You did the right thing, the surgeon added, looking directly at him now. What you brought us may have saved more than one life. Mario nodded, though his eyes darted away. Praise didn't erase fear. It never did. After the surgeon left, time blurred. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, offering water, adjusting blankets I didn't need adjusted. I watched the curtains sway slightly with each movement of air, listening to the hum of the hospital. The beeps, the distant footsteps, the murmured codes announced overhead. Then I heard Brandon's voice. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice carried something heavier than volume, truth colliding with betrayal. Adam, he said, and my heart clenched at the sound of my older son's name spoken like that. You need to listen to me. I couldn't hear Adam's response clearly, only the faint rasp of confusion. Brandon's words came sharper now, breaking through. She lied to you. She lied to Mom. She's been hiding medications. There are recordings, photos. The surgery was stopped. Silence followed. Then a sound that will stay with me for the rest of my life. A grown man crying not from pain, but from understanding. A broken, disbelieving sound, like something inside him had snapped. No, Adam whispered. She wouldn't. She loves me. Brandon's voice softened, and that frightened me more than his anger ever could. I know you believe that. I know. But love doesn't do this. I turned my face into the pillow, tears soaking the fabric. Hearing your child's world collapse is a pain that has no name. I wanted to run to Adam, to hold him the way I used to when he was small and scraped his knees, to promise that the world still made sense. But I couldn't lie anymore. None of us could. An hour later, police arrived. I didn't see them directly, but I felt the shift in the building, the way people straightened, the way voices dropped. Hospital administration followed close behind, their expressions controlled but strained. This wasn't the kind of story any institution wanted told, but the truth doesn't ask permission. A nurse came to sit with Mario while I was wheeled briefly to a private consultation room. The walls were beige, the chairs too stiff, the table too clean. A police officer stood near the door, not threatening, just present. They asked me to tell my story. So I did. I told them about the pressure. About the words duty and honor used like weapons. About the late-night phone calls and the unlabeled pills. About the look in Rebecca's eyes when she thought no one was watching. I told them how I'd felt cornered, how fear had disguised itself as obligation. No one interrupted. No one dismissed me. They wrote things down. They nodded. They asked careful questions, the kind meant to understand rather than accuse. When they finished, the officer leaned back slightly. Ma'am, he said, what your grandson brought us is significant. It aligns with other irregularities we've been investigating. Other? I repeated. He hesitated, then answered. There have been reports, unusual medication patterns, data discrepancies tied to experimental treatments. Nothing solid enough until now. This may be bigger than your family. The words sent a chill through me. Bigger than us meant more victims. More people who had trusted and suffered quietly. When I returned to my bed, Mario was asleep in the chair, curled into himself, exhaustion finally winning. I covered him with my sweater and watched his chest rise and fall. A child shouldn't have to be this brave. A child shouldn't have to save adults from their own silence. Later that evening, they let me see Adam. He looked smaller than ever, swallowed by the bed, his eyes red and hollow. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but it collapsed halfway. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. "Is it true?" I sat beside him and took his hand. It felt colder than it should have. "Some of it," I said honestly. "We're still learning the rest." He squeezed my fingers weakly. I thought I was dying because my body failed. I never thought. His voice broke, and he turned his face away, ashamed of tears. I moved closer, pressing my forehead to his. "Listen to me," I said. "You didn't fail. And this isn't your fault. Trusting someone you love is not a weakness." He nodded, tears slipping free. "I let them hurt you," he whispered. I shook my head. "No. I let myself stay quiet. That part is on me." For a moment, we just breathed together, mother and son, clinging to what remained solid in a world that had shifted. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window in my room, watching the city lights flicker beyond the glass. Somewhere in the building, Rebecca and her parents were being questioned. Somewhere else, doctors were re-examining charts, medications, histories. Somewhere else still, lives I would never meet might be spared because a frightened boy chose to speak. When dawn crept in pale and uncertain, I felt something settle in me. Not peace, not forgiveness, but resolve. I would never again let my silence be mistaken for consent. I would never again allow love to be used as leverage. And whatever came next, courtrooms, headlines, long recoveries, I would face it standing, not strapped to a table under someone else's command. Because the truth had already taken its first breath. And it was not going back to sleep. Morning arrived quietly, without ceremony, as if the world were trying to pretend nothing extraordinary had happened. Pale light slipped through the hospital blinds and traced thin lines across the floor. I watched it move slowly while machines hummed around me, their steady sounds a reminder that life, at least biologically, continued even when everything else felt shattered. Mario slept curled into the chair beside my bed, his mouth slightly open, his lashes casting shadows on his cheeks. In sleep, he looked like a normal child again. Not the small hero who had run into an operating room and stopped a crime with a cracked phone and shaking hands. I brushed his hair gently with my fingers, afraid to wake him, afraid to let him go. A nurse came in quietly to check my vitals. She smiled at Mario, then at me, her expression full of something that felt like respect. "You're doing well," she said softly. "Try to rest." I nodded, though rest felt impossible. My body was tired, but my mind kept replaying the last 24 hours in relentless loops. Every conversation, every look, every warning I had ignored because it was easier to obey than to confront. By mid-morning, the hospital felt different. Word had spread, not in gossip, but in that tense, careful way institutions communicate when something serious has gone wrong. Staff spoke in lower voices. Administrators appeared in pressed suits, walking fast, carrying folders thick with papers. The atmosphere carried the weight of consequences. Brandon came to see me first. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red, his shoulders slumped as if the anger that had fueled him the day before had finally burned out. "They're keeping Rebecca and her parents in separate rooms," he told me quietly. "Police are interviewing them one by one. They confiscated phones, bags, even her car." I closed my eyes. "And Adam?" "He's stable," Brandon said. "Scared. Angry. Mostly confused." "That's understandable," I murmured. His whole life just cracked open. Brandon sat heavily in the chair on the other side of the bed. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at me, his jaw tight. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry I didn't push harder earlier." I reached out and touched his arm. "You tried," I said. "I just wasn't ready to listen." He shook his head. "They cornered you. They used guilt like a weapon. That's not on you." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But another part, the part shaped by decades of responsibility, knew how easily I had folded. How quickly I had accepted pain as proof of love. Later that afternoon, 2 detectives came to speak with me again. They brought more questions, but also answers. They explained that Rebecca and her parents were suspected of being part of a wider network involved in testing unapproved medications on vulnerable patients. Kidney failure, they said, created desperation. Desperation made people compliant. Transplants created clean data. Families like mine, under pressure and fear, became convenient tools. The goal wasn't to kill, one detective said carefully. It was to control the decline, to create predictable outcomes. The words made my stomach churn. Adam's suffering reduced to numbers. My body reduced to a resource. Our family reduced to a case study. They targeted people who wouldn't fight back, the detective continued. Older parents. Patients who trusted their caregivers. Children who weren't expected to be heard. I thought of Mario. Of his small voice cutting through the operating room. Of how close they'd come to succeeding simply because they hadn't counted on a child refusing silence. "What happens now?" I asked. The detective sighed. "Now comes the long part. Charges. Trials. Hospital reviews. Media. It won't be quick. And it won't be quiet." He wasn't wrong. By evening, the first news alerts appeared on phones. Someone had leaked information. Maybe a staff member, maybe a police source. The headlines were careful at first, vague but ominous. Words like investigation, irregularities, donor coercion floated across screens. Adam saw them before anyone could stop him. When I went to his room later, he was staring at his phone, his face pale. "They're talking about us," he said hollowly. "About her." I sat beside him and took the phone gently from his hand. "They're talking about the truth," I said. "And the truth is loud when it's been hidden too long." He nodded slowly. "I feel stupid," he admitted. "I defended her. I let her talk to you like that." I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. "You were sick," I said firmly. "You were vulnerable. That's not stupidity. That's being human." Tears slid down his cheeks. "I almost let them take your kidney. But they didn't," I said. "And you're still here." That night, the hospital placed guards outside certain rooms. Not for protection from us, but from the press that had begun to gather at the entrance. Cameras. Microphones. Questions shouted into the night air. The world had smelled blood in the water. I was offered the option to leave quietly through a private exit, but I refused. Running felt too much like hiding. I had hidden long enough. Instead, I stayed. I sat with Adam. I watched Mario draw quietly at the small table in the corner, coloring with intense focus, as if crayons could restore order to chaos. I listened to Brandon speak to a lawyer recommended by the hospital, his voice steady now, purposeful. In the early hours of the morning, my husband Joe arrived, pushed by a nurse. His presence startled me. I hadn't expected them to bring him, but when I saw his face, drawn and tired, I felt something loosen in my chest. He couldn't speak, not really. But when I took his hand, he squeezed weakly, twice. His eyes searched mine, full of questions. "It's over," I whispered to him. "They can't hurt us anymore." A tear slid from the corner of his eye. He blinked slowly, deliberately, and in that small motion I felt more understanding than words could give. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of interviews, medical updates, and quiet moments that felt too fragile to name. Adam began dialysis. It wasn't easy. It drained him, left him pale and exhausted, but slowly, so slowly I was afraid to hope, his condition stabilized. Doctors confirmed what the investigation suspected. Substances in his system that shouldn't have been there, compounds that strained his kidneys beyond their natural progression. Evidence stacked up methodically, brick by brick. Rebecca stopped protesting after the second day. Her parents' confidence evaporated as lawyers replaced bluster. Their voices, once so loud in my living room, were reduced to legal language and careful silence. I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel revenge. I felt grief. Grief for the woman I thought Rebecca was. Grief for the family I believed I had. Grief for the months of suffering that could never be undone. One afternoon, as I sat alone by the hospital window, Brandon joined me. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the city below. "You know," he said quietly, "they asked me why I took those photos. Why I followed her." I glanced at him. "What did you tell them?" "That I grew up watching you carry everything," he replied. "And I knew something was wrong when you started looking smaller, like you were folding yourself away." His words struck deeper than he probably realized. I had folded myself for years, creasing my wants, my fears, my voice, until I fit into whatever space others needed. "I won't do that anymore," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "Good." When Mario came home from the hospital for the first time, neighbors gathered quietly, not with celebration, but with gentle curiosity. Some hugged him. Some praised his bravery. Others avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with how close the truth had come to their own lives. I watched from the porch as he stood a little straighter under their words, still a child, still unsure, but no longer invisible. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my old diary. Its pages were yellowed, the handwriting younger, hopeful. I added new words, my hand steady despite everything. I wrote about fear disguised as duty. About love twisted into obligation. About the moment a child's voice cut through silence and reminded me that my life was not a resource to be claimed. I closed the book and rested my hand on its cover. The storm wasn't over. Trials lay ahead. Healing would take time. Trust would be rebuilt slowly, carefully, if at all. But for the first time in a long while, the future felt like something I might choose, not something chosen for me. And that, I realized, was its own kind of survival. The first time I slept in my own bed again, the house felt unfamiliar, as if it had shifted slightly while I was gone. The walls were the same, the furniture unchanged, but something in the air had moved. Silence settled differently now. It no longer pressed down on my chest like a weight. Instead, it felt tentative, like a pause waiting to see what I would do next. Joe slept in his wheelchair beside the bed, his breathing shallow but steady. I lay awake for a long time listening to it, letting the rhythm anchor me. 4 years, I had lived inside other people's needs, measuring my worth by how much pain I could absorb. Now, with the crisis exposed and the lies dragged into daylight, I felt stripped raw, yet strangely lighter. In the weeks that followed, the world learned what had happened. Not all at once, but in waves. At first, the reports were careful and restrained, using words like alleged and under investigation. Then, as evidence mounted and arrests were made, the language hardened. Headlines grew sharper. Faces were shown. Names were printed. Rebecca's name appeared alongside phrases I never imagined would be connected to my family. Her parents' faces, once so confident, were captured in photographs that showed them smaller than they'd ever looked in my living room. The story widened, revealing others involved. Doctors who had looked away, suppliers who had profited, patients who had been quietly harmed. I didn't read every article. Brandon did, keeping track of what mattered, filtering the rest. "You don't owe the public anything," he reminded me when I tried to force myself through another painful paragraph. "You've already given enough." Adam's recovery became our focus. Dialysis was hard on him, but he approached it with a determination that reminded me of the boy he used to be. Each session left him drained, yet his color improved, his appetite slowly returned, and with it, a cautious hope. One afternoon, while I sat beside him during treatment, he reached for my hand. "Mom," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the machine, "I need to say something." I waited. "I spent years thinking love meant trusting without question," he continued. "I thought doubting someone meant I was ungrateful, weak. But I see now. I see how much that belief cost you." I squeezed his fingers gently. "We learn when we're ready," I said. "The important thing is that we learn at all." He nodded. "I want to get better. Not just physically. I want to be someone who protects you, not someone you have to protect from the truth." Those words stayed with me long after the machines stopped humming. Mario returned to school under a strange mix of attention and silence. Some children treated him like a hero. Others avoided him, unsure how to act around someone who had been on the news. His teacher called me in one afternoon, her expression careful. "He's brave," she said. "But he's also carrying a lot. We're watching him closely." At home, Mario oscillated between normal childhood, laughing at cartoons, racing toy cars across the floor, and moments of quiet heaviness where he stared off into nothing. I learned not to rush him out of those moments. When he spoke, I listened. One evening, as we washed dishes together, he asked, "Grandma, did I do the right thing even though it broke our family?" I set the plate down and met his eyes. "You didn't break the family," I said gently. "You showed us where it was already cracked." He considered that, then nodded slowly. "I don't want to be quiet anymore," he said. "Not if someone's getting hurt." "Neither do I replied. Joe surprised me one morning by gripping my hand harder than usual as I helped him into his chair. His eyes met mine, clearer than they had been in years. "You didn't bend," he whispered, the words rough but unmistakable. I froze, tears springing instantly. "You spoke," I said, barely breathing. He blinked slowly. "You stood." It wasn't a long conversation. He didn't have the strength. But it was enough. Enough to tell me he had seen what I had done, that my silence had not been invisible after all. The legal process unfolded with a relentless pace that felt both slow and fast. Depositions. Court dates. Lawyers' voices filling rooms with words that tried to make sense of suffering. I testified once, my hands steady despite the weight of it. I spoke calmly, plainly, refusing to dramatize or minimize what had happened. "I was pressured," I said. "I was told my value as a mother depended on my obedience. I believed that for too long." The courtroom was quiet when I finished. Not the suffocating silence of fear, but the attentive silence of people hearing something they could not easily dismiss. Afterward, a woman I didn't recognize approached me in the hallway. She was older than me, her posture tired, her eyes haunted. "My son was a patient there," she said softly. "Your story made me realize things I didn't want to see. Thank you for speaking." I held her hand, feeling the tremor in it. "You're not alone," I told her. "And you never were." Slowly, life began to take on a new shape. Not the old one. I knew that was gone, but something sturdier. Brandon moved closer, taking a small apartment nearby so he could check on us daily. Adam focused on treatment and therapy, rebuilding not just his strength but his sense of self. I made changes too. Small ones at first. I stopped apologizing when I didn't need to. I said no without explaining myself. I let uncomfortable silences exist instead of rushing to fill them. One afternoon, I cleared out a drawer in the kitchen and found the old consent forms I had brought home by mistake. My signature stared back at me, shaky and small. For a moment, my chest tightened. Then I tore the papers cleanly in half. That night, I wrote again in my diary. I wrote about the cost of obedience. About how love without boundaries becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. About how courage doesn't always arrive as confidence. Sometimes it arrives as a child running into a room, heart pounding, voice breaking, refusing to be quiet. Weeks turned into months. The trials progressed. Sentences were discussed. Accountability took form, imperfect but real. I didn't attend every hearing. I didn't need to watch justice perform itself to know it was happening. What mattered was the quiet victories. Adam laughing again, softly at first, then louder. Mario sleeping through the night without nightmares. Joe squeezing my hand when I spoke. Me standing in front of the mirror one morning and recognizing the woman looking back. Not as a sacrifice, not as a duty, but as a whole person. On the anniversary of the day everything changed. We gathered in the backyard. Nothing formal. Just family. Brandon grilled food. Mario ran circles around the table with his cars. Adam sat in the sun, his face healthier than it had been in years. I watched them and felt a deep, steady gratitude. Not the loud kind, but the kind that settles into your bones. Mario came up to me, holding one of his cars. "Grandma," he said, "do you think people will listen to stories like ours?" "I think they already are," I said. "And every time someone listens, it gets a little easier for the next person to speak." He smiled, satisfied, and ran off again. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I stepped outside and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint but present, stubborn points of light in the darkness. I thought about all the mothers who had been told to endure quietly. All the people who had been taught that love meant surrender. All the voices still waiting to be heard. I whispered a promise into the night, not to anyone else, but to myself. I will not be silent again. And in that promise, I found something better than revenge. I found my voice.